Welcome to Coffee with Craig. Happy Monday. Hey, want to say thank you to everybody who made it out to the rally at the state capitol here in California. Very, very well attended. And as usual, a very lawfully held event where everybody was very well behaved, as you know we usually are. It's we're obviously not the Occupy crowd. But it was a really good event. Had a chance to talk with a lot of you folks. Really appreciate you guys coming out, and really appreciate all the kind words. We have no idea how much it means to know how many patriots there are out there supporting civil rights in California and across the country. So thank you so much for that. Today, I have a very interesting little topic. So, we get this a lot, and when the question is law enforcement, does law enforcement support the Second Amendment? And I know it's, you would think that, a lot of people just think generally that it is. When I deal a lot of times with legislators and we ask them, in particular, let me clarify, the legislators who are introducing the anti-Second Amendment legislation, the gun bans and all of that, we ask them, well, before you introduced this legislation, did you bother to talk to anybody? Any gun groups, any Second Amendment advocacy groups? Well, we talked with law enforcement, and so we always find ourselves having to educate those who are on the other side that just because you speak to someone in law enforcement, or just because you speak to a law enforcement agency or a law enforcement official, doesn't mean that you spoke to someone who is pro-gun or pro-Second Amendment. Now, polls and studies have shown that on average, rank and file law enforcement officers support the individual civilian, the citizen's right to keep and bear arms. The challenge starts to happen when we start dealing with the union bosses, or the bosses that represent these organizations, or the lobbyists that represent these organizations in the legislature. Oftentimes what winds up happening is a bill is introduced to either restrict access to our Second Amendment rights or to ban something or something along those lines. The law enforcement unions, or the people who represent, like the chiefs, the departments that hire these folks, that hire law enforcement, a lot of times they'll come out in opposition, or if there's an exemption, a lot of times they'll come out in opposition until an exemption is written in for their folks. Then they'll either remove their opposition, or they'll actually support the legislation. And all of that being said, my point, the reason why I want to talk about it today is because today, former Congresswoman Gabby Gifford is going to be introducing or launching an effort to bring law enforcement to Congress to support anti-Second Amendment legislation that they say will help law enforcement to be able to better do their jobs. The interesting thing about this particular legislation, the two bills that they cite in the article, is one having to do with that will basically remove the prohibition of suppressors or silencers, because there's such a proliferation of gun violence involving silencers. Right, you get it. And the other has to do with the bill that will create national reciprocity, that will require states to recognize the concealed carry permits from other states. Because once again, there is an over-proliferation of crime, gun crime, being purveyed by those who have concealed carry permits. Yeah, no. So you get it. You get what I'm talking about. But that's the thing is understand that a lot of their legislation, it's got nothing to do with what is. It's got to do with their perception, what they have made up in their own tiny little mind, not what actually is. It's what they believe the world to be. And so their goal is to make sure that law-abiding citizens don't have a right to access their Second Amendment rights, or in the case of silencers, that we don't have, that we can't hear. I guess that's what it is. They want to make sure that we don't have access to being able to hear, because we're going to be wearing our ears, or we're not going to wear our ears and just blow out our eardrums. I don't know. I don't know what these folks are thinking, but it just shows the level of ignorance, really, honest and truly ignorance. And I don't say ignorance to be insulting. Ignorance is simply a lack of knowledge. It's not knowing. What's stupid, and yeah, that is meant to be an insult. What's stupid is they don't care to know. These people want to affect policy, but they don't care to know. They wish to remain ignorant. And that is stupid. And yeah, I did call them stupid. Anyway, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk with you a little bit about today. Just once again, sharing the fact that, law enforcement for the most part, all over the board on this particular issue, but once again, rank and file law enforcement generally tends to be pro-Second Amendment. Unions, departments, sheriffs, who are elected officials, they tend to be all over the map depending on where they're elected at. And then a lot of times the police chiefs, and here's the thing I'll say about police chiefs. Most police chiefs are not elected. Most city police chiefs are actually appointed by a city council. And so the position largely that they voice publicly is often not their own, but it's the position of the law enforcement agency or the city that they represent. So anyway, let's see what you folks have to say about this. Good morning, Nashville, Tennessee. I fully support 2A, and it makes our job easier. He's a retired law enforcement officer. That's Todd. Todd, thank you so much for your service. We do appreciate you, and I fully believe that you do. But here's a question I'll ask you, Todd. Have you noticed in Nashville, or at least nationally, have you noticed a number of the law enforcement union leaders oftentimes tend to go the opposite direction, or at least be silent on some of this legislation? I can't speak for Nashville. I know here in California, it's clearly been the case. I'm wondering here, watching this particular thing about this particular article, I'm wondering how many of these people are actually either work for departments that are governed or run by left-wing liberal gun-grabbing cities, or well, that's pretty much what I'll bet the case is in most of those cases. Let's see here. He says yes, I have, and silent and avoidance. And here's the worst part. It's because I realize and I get it. Law enforcement cops, you guys like everybody else. You go, you work your long day. You come home, you got family, you got all the stuff that you have to do. So sometimes when you expect your union leadership to handle their business, right? To make sure that they represent you. And sometimes they do stuff and you don't even know about it. So it's important for all of us to recognize those who represent us. I don't care if you work and you have a union, if you are a part of a membership organization that takes positions on issues, it's important for you to know where those organizations stand. And when they don't represent you well, you need to stand up and say something. I'll give you an example. I sit on a school board. There's an organization called the California School Boards Association. I'm an active member in their policy-making body, and I actively stand up and tell them when they take a position, in particular on Second Amendment issues. I tell them when they're full of a bunch of hooey, and I share with them the truth to overcome the lies that they're getting, or at least the lies that they're getting from whether it's the from the legislature or from the gun control community. I know how to control my gun. That's my gun control right there. Tulare County, 100% pro Second Amendment. Yes, I do know Tulare County, and I'm willing to bet it is largely pro Second Amendment. Here's my question though: how many of the school districts in Tulare County, school districts, actually have approved for individuals to be able to carry on their school campuses? Interesting question. Is your school board pro Second Amendment? Probably law enforcement is. I probably believe that. But is your school board pro Second Amendment? If the U.S. government doesn't have to follow laws until it's been reviewed by the court, why do citizens have to? Very good question. I don't know, but probably because it's a little hard to arrest government. That's That's what I'm going to guess. I really don't know how to answer your question. It's probably more rhetorical, but a good one nonetheless. PORAC, the Chiefs Association, it too politically correct. Data-driven public safety is way better to look at these. Yes, PORAC and the organizations that you mentioned do tend to be on the wrong side of gun control or of the Second Amendment more often than not. They're either on the wrong side or they are not heard from at all. And here's the worst part about it, and I'll probably close with this. The worst part about it is here in the state of California, if law enforcement had stood with law-abiding citizens and their right to keep and bear arms, we probably wouldn't see half of the legislation, half of the controls and restrictions that we see right now. And that's the sad part. That is the part that bothers me the most, because I know that most of you out there who are represented by these organizations don't support that. I know you don't. We know you don't. It's time for your leadership, time for your lobbyists to know that you don't support it. Anyway, folks, that's it for today's Coffee with Craig. Thank you so much for tuning in. You folks take care and stay free. If you like these updates, please share them with your friends and subscribe to our YouTube channel.